The body was arranged too carefully to be an accident. At 5:42 a.m., beneath a pale Utah sunrise, a county irrigation worker spotted what he first thought was a mannequin lying in the dry canal bed outside Salt Lake City. The air was sharp with early spring cold, the desert wind dragging dust in thin spirals across cracked earth. When the man climbed down the embankment for a closer look, he saw the truth in the stillness. The victim lay on his back, hands folded loosely over his stomach, boots aligned neatly together. There was no visible blood soaking the ground, no frantic disturbance in the dirt. Whoever had left him there had taken their time. By 6:30 a.m., red and blue lights flickered silently against the pale desert landscape. Salt Lake City police sealed off the canal. Detective Mark Ellison stepped carefully down the incline, boots sinking into loose soil. He had worked homicide for 11 years. He had seen shootings fueled by rage, domestic disputes gone too far, robberies that ended in panic. This felt different. Ellison crouched beside the body. Late 20s. No wallet. No obvious defensive wounds. A faint ligature mark around the neck, barely visible in the early light. Dumped, one of the uniforms muttered behind him. Ellison didn't answer. Dumped bodies were usually rush jobs, rolled from cars, left twisted, stripped of dignity. This man had been placed. Positioned. Almost respectfully. The surrounding desert offered little help. Tire impressions blurred by wind. No clear footprints. The canal was dry this time of year. Irrigation wouldn't resume until late May. Whoever chose this location understood that. Crime scene technicians moved quietly, photographing, bagging, dusting. The silence out there felt heavy, interrupted only by radio chatter and the hum of distant interstate traffic. I-15 ran less than 2 miles away, close enough for convenience, far enough to avoid witnesses. By noon, the victim was transported to the medical examiner's office. Preliminary assessments suggested strangulation. Controlled. Intentional. No signs of robbery. No signs of sexual assault. Ellison stood at the edge of the canal after most of the units cleared out. He stared at the flattened patch of dirt where the body had been. Something about the posture unsettled him more than violence would have. It suggested patience. It suggested practice. The evening news carried the story at 6. Authorities are investigating the discovery of a deceased male found this morning in an irrigation canal west of the city. Police have not released the identity pending notification of family. The camera cut to aerial footage of the empty canal, yellow tape fluttering in the wind. In a modest duplex 15 miles away, Daniel Reyes sat at his small kitchen table and watched without expression. The television cast a faint blue glow across the room. The blinds were half closed. Outside, traffic moved steadily along Redwood Road, commuters heading home. Inside, everything was orderly, dishes washed, counters clean, work boots aligned near the door. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, hands resting on his thighs. 32 years old. Dark hair trimmed short. No tattoos. No criminal record. He had finished his shift at the distribution warehouse at 3 a.m., driven home in his white cargo van, showered, and slept for a few hours before waking to the afternoon sun. Now he watched the news anchor's careful tone. Police are asking anyone with information to contact the Salt Lake City tip line. Daniel lowered the volume. He studied the footage again. The wide desert, the canal bed, the empty space where the body had been. They hadn't shown the positioning. They wouldn't. His gaze drifted to the kitchen counter. Nothing unusual there. Just a folded receipt, his keys, a half-empty glass of water. He felt no panic. No trembling. The sensation that filled him was quieter than excitement and steadier than fear. It was clarity. For months, the idea had lived in his mind as an abstract possibility. A question. Could it be done carefully enough? Quietly enough? Could a person cross that boundary and return to routine as if nothing had shifted? The answer, it seemed, was yes. He stood and walked to the sink, rinsing the glass slowly. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Not for him. Not yet. Daniel had chosen the canal weeks earlier during one of his late-night drives after work. He often drove aimlessly before going home, windows down, desert air moving through the cab of the van. He had noticed how empty the irrigation channels were this season, how little light reached them after midnight, how the interstate masked distant sounds. He had noticed everything. The victim had been alone when Daniel approached him 3 nights ago near a bus stop on State Street. A brief conversation, a polite offer of a ride. Calm voice, measured movements, no rush. Control had been the key. Not anger, not chaos. Daniel returned to the kitchen table and turned off the television entirely. The room settled into silence. Across town, Detective Ellison sat at his desk reviewing the preliminary report. No identification yet. No missing persons match so far. He rubbed his temples and stared at the single photograph clipped to the file, the victim's peaceful, unnatural stillness. This wasn't random. Ellison felt it in the methodical absence of evidence. Somewhere in the city, someone had planned this. And somewhere in the same city, Daniel Reyes turned off his lights, lay down in his narrow bed, and closed his eyes. He slept deeply. Daniel Reyes had arrived in the United States in the spring of 1992 with a single suitcase and a work visa sponsored by a cousin who already lived in Nevada. He was 18 then, thin, serious, and observant. He spoke little English but listened carefully. He learned quickly that in America, silence could be mistaken for politeness, and politeness rarely drew attention. By 1995, he had moved north to Utah. The warehouse job came through a classified ad in the Salt Lake Tribune. Night maintenance. Stable pay. Minimal supervision. He took it without hesitation. 7 years later, in 1999, his life had narrowed into routine. He woke at 2 in the afternoon. Showered. Ate something small, usually eggs, sometimes leftover rice and beans. At 4:15 p.m., he left his duplex and drove his white Ford cargo van south toward the distribution center near the industrial corridor west of I-15. He clocked in at 5. He worked alone most of the night, repairing conveyor belts, replacing light fixtures, clearing mechanical jams. He preferred the hum of machines to conversation. His coworkers described him the same way when asked later: reliable, quiet, never late. He did not drink. He did not date. He did not argue. If someone made a joke at his expense, he gave a faint smile and returned to work. There was nothing remarkable about him. That was intentional. Control, Daniel had learned, began with invisibility. The first time the thought became more than curiosity was during one of his late-night drives in early February. Snow still lined the edges of the roads then, pushed into gray ridges by plows. He had pulled into a 24-hour gas station near State Street around 2:30 a.m. for coffee. That was where he noticed how alone people could be in a city. A man stood near the bus stop bench across the street, shoulders hunched against the cold. No one else nearby. No traffic at that hour except the occasional semi-truck roaring down the highway. Sodium streetlights cast everything in dull amber. Daniel watched from inside his van. He did not feel anger toward the stranger. He felt something else, a quiet assessment, the way one might study a structure before dismantling it. He observed posture, surroundings, patterns of movement. The man checked his watch repeatedly. He was waiting. Waiting meant predictable. Daniel drove away that night. But the image stayed. Over the following weeks, he began to notice similar figures. A woman leaving a diner after closing shift, a man walking alone along a poorly lit stretch of road, a teenager waiting outside a convenience store long after midnight. Each observation felt like data. He began carrying a small notebook in the glove compartment of his van. Nothing incriminating, only times, locations, traffic flow patterns. If anyone had opened it, they would have seen what looked like delivery notes or mileage logs. He told himself he was studying opportunity. But the truth was simpler. He wanted to know if he could. Daniel's childhood in Mexico had not been violent. His father worked construction. His mother cleaned houses. There had been discipline, certainly, but not cruelty. What he remembered most was the sense of being overlooked. The middle child between an older brother who excelled in school and a younger sister who demanded constant attention. He learned early that being quiet meant survival. Being unnoticed meant safety. When he moved to the United States, that invisibility became strength. He perfected it. At work, He never volunteered opinions. In public, he avoided eye contact long enough to be forgettable but not suspicious. He paid bills on time, filed taxes correctly, renewed registration on his van every year without delay. He built a life that produced no questions. Yet beneath that controlled exterior was a persistent absence. He did not experience emotions the way others seemed to. Joy felt muted, anger brief and shallow, fear rare. It was as though something essential had been removed before he arrived in adulthood. What remained was curiosity. And curiosity, left alone long enough, searches for boundaries. 3 nights before the body was found in the canal, Daniel saw the man at the bus stop again. Same location, same hour. The man wore a dark jacket and carried a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked tired. The last bus had already passed. Daniel slowed the van without appearing to. He let the engine idle as if considering a turn. The street was nearly empty. He rolled down the passenger window halfway. "You need a ride?" he asked in a steady voice. The man hesitated only briefly. Cold makes decisions easier. He stepped closer, peering into the dim interior of the van. "Yeah. I missed the last one." Daniel unlocked the door. The interaction was simple. No force. No threat. Just a series of small, ordinary choices made by someone who believed himself safe. As the man climbed inside, Daniel felt something settle into place inside him. Not excitement, not nerves. Alignment. He drove west instead of north. The industrial lights thinned. The city receded. The interstate hummed in the distance. Daniel spoke little during the drive. He asked neutral questions: where the man worked, where he was headed. He listened. He cataloged details automatically. When he finally turned onto the gravel access road leading toward the irrigation canal, the man frowned. "This isn't the way." Daniel kept his voice calm. "I know a shortcut." Control. Always control. Now, days later, sitting in his kitchen after watching the news report, Daniel replayed the memory not for emotion but for analysis. What had worked? What could improve? He recognized one flaw: proximity to a bus stop with potential security cameras nearby. He would need to vary locations next time. Because there would be a next time. Not immediately. He was patient. Across the city, Detective Ellison was beginning to request traffic camera footage from surrounding intersections. It was routine. A long shot. Daniel rinsed his dinner plate and placed it carefully in the drying rack. He did not know Ellison's name. Ellison did not know his. Yet their paths had already begun to narrow toward each other, drawn together by a single quiet decision made under amber streetlights on State Street. Daniel turned off the kitchen light. In the darkness, he felt only steadiness. Daniel did not rush. The gravel road toward the irrigation canal was uneven, forcing the van to slow naturally. The man in the passenger seat shifted uncomfortably. "You sure this is faster?" he asked. Daniel nodded once, eyes on the road. Construction on the main route. The lie was smooth. Delivered without hesitation. They drove another quarter-mile before Daniel eased the van to a stop near the concrete slope leading down into the dry canal. The interstate hummed faintly in the distance. No other headlights. No houses nearby. Only wind brushing across open land. Daniel turned off the engine. For a moment, neither man moved. Then the passenger exhaled sharply. "Man, this doesn't look right." He reached for the door handle. Daniel moved at that exact second. Not fast, not frantic, but precise. He had already looped the length of nylon cord beneath his thigh before offering the ride. Now his hands rose smoothly, slipping the cord over the man's head from behind before confusion could fully form into resistance. The struggle was brief. The victim fought, instinctively, desperately, but Daniel had chosen carefully. Similar height. Similar build. He had rehearsed leverage in his mind for weeks. He pulled backward, tightening the cord, shifting his weight, using the seat as brace. Control. The sounds were muted inside the van. Shoes scraping rubber matting. Labored breathing. A sharp elbow that caught Daniel's cheek but failed to break his focus. He did not shout. He did not curse. He waited. It took less than 3 minutes. When the body went still, Daniel kept the cord tight for longer. He counted slowly in his head. 60 seconds. 90. 2 minutes. Only when he was certain did he release. The interior of the van smelled faintly of sweat and vinyl. Daniel's breathing remained steady. His hands did not tremble. He studied the body in the passenger seat. There was no surge of triumph. No wave of horror. Only confirmation. He had crossed the boundary, and nothing inside him had shattered. Moving the body required more effort than the act itself. Dead weight resisted gravity awkwardly. Daniel exited the van, opened the passenger door fully, and maneuvered the man carefully down the concrete incline into the canal bed. He paused halfway, scanning the horizon. Empty. At the bottom, he laid the body flat on its back. The man's eyes were partially open. Daniel closed them with his thumb and forefinger. He adjusted the arms, straightened the jacket, aligned the boots. He didn't know why he did that. Perhaps symmetry felt complete. Perhaps disorder felt careless. He removed the backpack and searched it quickly: wallet, ID, a folded photograph, bus transfer slips. He took the wallet but left the rest. Identification could delay discovery if discarded elsewhere. The wallet would be disposed of separately. Before returning to the van, Daniel scanned for footprints. The soil was dry and compacted. Wind would take care of what little impression remained by morning. He drove away without turning on the headlights until he reached the paved road. Back home, Daniel stripped the passenger seat cover he had installed earlier that week and placed it in a heavy-duty trash bag. The nylon cord he cut into 3 pieces and flushed in separate stops over the next 2 days, gas station restrooms miles apart. He cleaned the van thoroughly. Bleach diluted carefully. Gloves worn and discarded. Then he showered. Standing beneath hot water, he waited for something: guilt, nausea, fear. None came. Instead, he felt an unusual stillness. As if static noise that had always existed in the background of his thoughts had finally gone quiet. He slept deeply that morning. 2 days later, he drove past the canal from a distance. Police tape fluttered. Vehicles parked along the dirt shoulder. Daniel did not slow. He did not stare. He merged onto the interstate and continued toward work, hands steady on the steering wheel. On the radio, news reports began referring to the victim by name: Michael Turner, 28, warehouse clerk, recently relocated to Salt Lake City. Daniel listened carefully. A life reduced to a headline. He felt no hatred toward Michael Turner. Only curiosity about what would happen next. Across town, Detective Ellison stood over the autopsy findings. Cause of death: ligature strangulation. No defensive skin under the victim's fingernails. Minimal trace evidence. Whoever did this, the medical examiner said quietly, knew what they were doing. Ellison looked at the report again. First-time killers usually made mistakes. Panic. Overkill. Sloppiness. This felt measured. Deliberate. He didn't yet know he was correct. Because somewhere in the city, Daniel Reyes was already thinking about refinement. Not escalation. Refinement. And that was far more dangerous. Detective Mark Ellison disliked coincidences. 3 days after the discovery of Michael Turner's body, the autopsy report lay open across his desk inside the Salt Lake City Police Department's Homicide Division. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside the narrow window, late March wind pushed gray clouds over the Wasatch Range. Cause of death: ligature strangulation. Estimated time of death: between 2:30 and 4 a.m. Toxicology: negative for drugs and alcohol. No evidence of sexual assault. No robbery beyond the missing wallet. Ellison tapped a pen against the desk. The missing wallet bothered him less than the positioning of the body. Robbery implied haste, confrontation, unpredictability. But Turner had been laid out carefully, almost ceremonially. Hands folded. Jacket straightened. That wasn't theft. That was intention. Turner's background offered no immediate answers. 28. Recently transferred from a warehouse branch in Colorado. No criminal history. No known enemies. Lived alone in a small apartment near downtown. According to coworkers, he stayed late the night he died, finishing inventory reports. He missed the last bus home. Security cameras from the warehouse parking lot showed him leaving alone at 2:17 a.m. Ellison requested footage from nearby intersections and gas stations. In 1999, surveillance systems were inconsistent, grainy analog recordings overwritten every few days unless preserved. Officers collected tapes quickly before they were recycled. Hours of static angles followed. Cars passing. Headlights blurring. Nothing obvious. One camera at a convenience store near State Street captured Turner standing at the bus stop. At 2:31 a.m., a white cargo van slowed briefly near the curb. The footage quality was poor. No visible license plate. No clear view of the driver. But it was something. Ellison leaned closer to the screen in the evidence room. The van idled for approximately 20 seconds before pulling away. Turner was no longer visible in frame after that moment. Could be nothing, one of the texts said. Ellison nodded slowly. Or it could be everything. Across town, Daniel Reyes replaced a malfunctioning belt motor inside the warehouse conveyor system. The mechanical hum soothed him. The predictability of machines felt honest compared to people. A worn bearing made noise. A broken switch failed to connect. Problems presented solutions. Human systems were slower. He knew the police would check cameras. That was standard. He had considered it. The convenience store footage had been visible from his position inside the van. He remembered noticing the camera mounted above the door. But the angle faced the parking lot, not the street directly. He had calculated distance, glare, shadow. He had not worn anything distinctive. Dark jacket. Neutral clothing. Still, he replayed the moment mentally. Refinement required review. He would avoid established camera corridors next time. By the end of the week, Ellison organized a small internal meeting. Let's assume, he began, standing before a whiteboard, that Turner accepted a ride. Several detectives exchanged looks. Voluntarily, one asked. There are no signs of a struggle at the bus stop. No witnesses heard anything. If he was forced, it was quick. But the footage suggests he approached the van. Ellison wrote on the board. Opportunistic or targeted? If it's opportunistic, he continued, we're looking at someone trolling late-night corridors. Industrial areas. Bus routes. Shift change windows. He paused. If it's targeted, then Turner was watched in advance. The room grew quiet. A first-time offender might panic and escalate immediately. But this crime scene showed restraint. Planning. Selection of a disposal site unlikely to be disturbed for weeks. Ellison circled another word. Control. Whoever did this wanted control, he said. He did not yet realize how accurate that instinct was. 2 days later, another missing person report reached the department. 24. Last seen leaving a diner after midnight near West Temple. Car found parked behind the building. No signs of forced entry. Ellison felt something shift in his chest. It could be unrelated. The city wasn't immune to random crime. But the timing was close. He drove personally to the diner. Employees described the woman, Emily Navarro, as friendly, responsible, punctual. She left alone at 12:48 a.m. Security cameras showed her walking toward the parking lot. No footage captured what happened beyond the lot's perimeter. No screams reported. No witnesses. Ellison stood beside her parked sedan, staring at the empty driver's seat. The desert wind moved through the alleyway, carrying the faint smell of fryer oil. If this was the same offender, the pattern was forming faster than anyone would like. Daniel heard about the missing woman on the radio during his drive home. He kept his eyes on the road. He had not acted again yet. But he felt the pull returning, not urgency, not compulsion. A quiet awareness that the boundary he crossed once no longer felt distant. The city seemed different now. Not more dangerous. More open. He turned off the radio before the report finished. Across town, Detective Ellison returned to his office and pinned 2 photographs side by side on the corkboard. Michael Turner. Emily Navarro. No confirmed link. Not yet. But the space between the photographs felt charged, like dry air before a storm. And somewhere in that same city, Daniel Reyes washed his hands slowly at his kitchen sink, watching the water spiral down the drain. He was patient. The desert had taught him that. But patience, when paired with curiosity, does not fade. It sharpens. Detective Ellison could feel the tension growing. 2 victims now, both last seen late at night, both vanishing without a trace. The city hummed around him, oblivious, but inside the precinct, the pattern was starting to emerge. Ellison spread the photos of Turner and Navarro across his desk. He studied the angles, the times, the locations. Nothing overtly connected them. Different neighborhoods, different routines, yet the invisible thread between them tugged insistently at his instincts. He convened a meeting with his team. "We may be dealing with someone who chooses carefully," Ellison began, pointing at a map. "They pick people who are alone, predictable. They operate quietly, leaving almost nothing behind. It's not random, it's deliberate." A young officer raised a hand. "Sir, could it be someone from the city? Someone who watches these routes and waits?" "Exactly," Ellison said. "Someone familiar with these streets, these schedules. Someone comfortable moving unnoticed." Across town, Daniel Reyes walked down dimly lit streets after finishing his night shift. His steps were quiet, his mind focused on patterns. Not people, not emotions, just patterns. He thought about where the police might look, what they might notice, how much they could predict. He didn't feel fear. He didn't feel guilt. He felt attention, precision. Watching without being watched. The city itself became a map in his mind. Lights, shadows, traffic, empty sidewalks. Even with the radio reporting Navarro's disappearance, he stayed calm. Nothing had changed. Only the rules of engagement had shifted. Ellison pored over the surveillance tapes again. Grainy images, blurred faces, empty streets. Every detail was a puzzle piece. Something subtle, a shadow moving too quickly, a reflection in a store window, a pause that didn't make sense. Hours passed. Coffee cooled. The city outside carried on, indifferent, but inside the room, the detectives were consumed by invisible patterns. Ellison tapped his pen on the desk. The killer, he realized, wasn't sloppy. He wasn't impulsive. He was patient, methodical, and in that, dangerous. By the end of the week, another report came in. A male, 25, last seen leaving a late-night diner. No cameras captured his departure. No witnesses noted anything unusual. Ellison didn't rush to link the case, but his instincts flared. A pattern was forming, and the subtle similarities couldn't be ignored. Maps, schedules, notes. The detectives worked tirelessly to cross-reference. Every bus route, every late-night shift, every stretch of deserted road was examined. And somewhere in the city, Daniel Reyes returned to his apartment. He washed his hands slowly, looked at his neat kitchen, and checked the small notebook in his glove compartment. Patterns noted, observations reviewed. He didn't celebrate, didn't plan the next step yet. He waited. He always waited. Patience, as the desert had taught him, sharpened perception. It revealed opportunity. And for the detectives, the clock was running, whether they knew it or not. Detective Ellison had a breakthrough, subtle but undeniable. A clerk at the local convenience store remembered something peculiar from the night Turner disappeared. The white cargo van. Not the driver, just the van, idling briefly, then gone. The clerk hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now, piecing together the missing persons reports, the repeated pattern of late-night departures, and the empty streets, Ellison saw a thread forming. He requested all commercial vehicle registrations for white cargo vans registered in Salt Lake City. The paperwork, already public record, gave him hundreds of names. But he narrowed the search by timing and proximity. Who would have been near the bus stop around 2:30 a.m. on the nights in question? Small details. Tiny coincidences. Each one a door slightly ajar. Meanwhile, Daniel Reyes maintained his routines. Work, observations, and returning home each morning before dawn. His mind catalogued each movement of the city, each shadow, each light flickering from a street lamp. He knew the police were likely scouring the city maps, looking for someone unusual. He didn't panic. He didn't change his habits abruptly. But subtle adjustments were made, routes shifted slightly, parking spots changed, his interactions minimized. Refinement, always refinement. Ellison had begun mapping every reported disappearance, cross-referencing schedules, bus routes, and the sparse camera footage. He noticed a common thread. All victims had been alone, all seen within a specific set of industrial and commercial zones during late-night hours. The pattern was incomplete, but enough to suggest someone who planned carefully but didn't necessarily leave fingerprints. Detectives began a late-night stakeout near one of the intersections identified in the map. They worked in pairs, watching quietly from unmarked vehicles, hoping to catch any suspicious activity. Hours of waiting passed. The city seemed still, almost normal. But everyone knew that calm could be deceptive. Daniel was aware of the increased presence. He noticed more police cars during his late-night drives. Surveillance, silent and distant, but present nonetheless. His notebook remained untouched, but mental records sharpened. Each shadow, each light, each reflection became a part of his strategy. He felt no fear, only calculation. The world was a board, pieces moved subtly, and he was always thinking 3 steps ahead. Detective Ellison reviewed witness statements from other nearby businesses. A night shift worker at a laundromat recalled seeing a man matching Daniel's description carrying a box near the alley where Navarro was last seen. A delivery driver mentioned a van parked for several minutes near the same location. Though circumstantial, these small testimonies added weight. They were threads that could be followed. Back in his apartment, Daniel pored over the city map, noting intersections, streetlights, alleyways, and bus stops. He adjusted his observations based on the perceived police activity. Everything invisible to the casual observer became a map of opportunity and caution. Ellison, across town, stared at the same map, now covered with pins, notes, and timelines. The investigation had become a mental chess game, each move uncertain, each observation potentially decisive. And somewhere in the city, both men, hunter and prey in their own minds, circled closer without knowing it. The city seemed quieter at night, yet Detective Ellison felt the opposite. The streets whispered. The missing persons reports, the surveillance footage, and the growing number of tips created an invisible web. A breakthrough came from a simple, overlooked source, a janitor at one of the industrial buildings where Navarro worked. He remembered a white van parked near a rear alley around 12:50 a.m., the night she disappeared. It had stayed for a brief moment before driving off silently. Ellison immediately cross-referenced the vehicle type with the earlier report of Turner's disappearance. A pattern emerged. The timing, the neighborhoods, the vehicle description, all pointed to someone careful, someone who understood the city and its rhythms. Meanwhile, Daniel Reyes adjusted his routine subtly. He avoided the streets he knew had cameras, took alternative routes to work, and stayed aware of law enforcement presence. His observations had become almost reflexive. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every reflection was catalogued. He did not act. Not yet. But he knew the city had shifted beneath him. He was aware of the hunters, their cautious movements, their maps, their timing. And he waited, always waiting. Ellison ordered a series of discreet interviews. Friends, co-workers, anyone who might have seen a white cargo van late at night. The investigators discovered that several people in different neighborhoods had seen the same vehicle near the locations and times in question. Nothing concrete. Nothing undeniable. But enough to build a profile. The killer was methodical, but predictable in his own way. Ellison saw that. He began to compile a mental picture. Male, likely early 20s to early 30s, familiar with industrial and commercial areas, careful to avoid detection. The detectives increased surveillance in areas where the van had been repeatedly sighted. Officers took shifts during late-night hours, quietly observing alleys, parking lots, and bus stops. Every night became a chess match between patience and opportunity. Daniel noticed the subtle changes in city behavior. He felt the invisible watch of police officers, their quiet presence on streets and sidewalks. But he did not panic. He adjusted, refined, and waited for the right opportunity. 1 week later, an unexpected tip arrived. A local tow yard had a white cargo van impounded 2 nights earlier. Officers rushed to retrieve the vehicle and found traces of soil matching the areas where Navarro and Turner had been last seen. No fingerprints. No blood. but the soil samples and fiber traces were enough to establish a connection. Ellison stared at the evidence board. The city had finally left a mark, subtle but undeniable. A thread, thin but taut, linking the crimes. And somewhere in his apartment, Daniel Reyes studied the city map again, noting how quickly patterns could be detected, how easily a trail could be traced. He smiled faintly. Refinement was not just about precision, it was about patience, and he had plenty. The game was no longer abstract. The hunters were closing in, but so was the time for observation. And Daniel knew how to wait. Detective Ellison could feel the net tightening. Each new report, each tip, and the soil and fiber evidence from the impounded van brought clarity. The city's late-night industrial zones and deserted streets no longer seemed random, they mapped out a methodical path. Forensic analysts had processed the van. While no fingerprints or DNA were recovered from the interior, traces of soil and fibers matched multiple disappearance sites. The conclusion was subtle but damning. A connection between the victims, the locations, and the vehicle. Ellison reviewed the witness statements again. Multiple people had seen a white van lurking or idling in unexpected places late at night. Each description, small as it was, formed a recognizable pattern. "We're close," he said to his team. "Someone knows the city intimately. Someone cautious, but not careful enough to avoid leaving subtle traces. Watch the intersections, watch the parking lots, watch the routes." Meanwhile, Daniel Reyes noted the changes. Police presence increased, more vehicles patrolled the streets he frequented. Cameras seemed more active, and he could sense that patterns in his previous movements had been detected. He didn't panic. He adjusted his timing. He parked differently, changed routes, and observed from a distance. The game had become sharper, more strategic. He realized the hunters were closing in, but he still held the advantage of observation. The city, in its quiet streets, became a chessboard. Each light, shadow, and movement was a piece in his calculation. Every late-night patrol and every suspicious look could be countered with patience and timing. Ellison organized late-night surveillance shifts in zones where the van had been repeatedly observed. Officers worked in pairs, remaining unseen, cataloging each passing vehicle. After several nights, a recurring pattern emerged. A white cargo van appeared near bus stops and industrial areas at similar times. While the driver was never directly identified, the combination of vehicle, timing, and location narrowed the suspect list significantly. The detectives compiled a profile: male, likely early 20s to early 30s, familiar with the city's industrial corridors, precise and patient, careful but leaving subtle traces. The city itself had betrayed him. Daniel observed these developments from afar. He realized that his habits were under scrutiny. The subtle traces, soil on shoes, fiber on the van, had alerted the detectives. He reviewed his routines mentally, calculating adjustments to stay ahead. He did not stop moving. He did not panic. He waited, refining each step. The thrill wasn't in fear or chaos. It was in precision and anticipation. Ellison, meanwhile, felt a mix of frustration and clarity. The threads were visible now. The killer had left enough, not direct evidence of acts, but enough to connect the dots. The map was forming, the net tightening, and the city itself had provided a trail. Detective Ellison felt the chase close in on him like a tightening noose. The city seemed alive in a new way, shadows stretching longer, alleyways quieter, bus stops empty at the wrong times. Every report, every trace of soil, every fiber from the white van was a breadcrumb, and the trail was becoming unmistakable. An anonymous tip arrived one rainy evening. Someone had seen a man matching the developing profile lingering near a bus stop just before Navarro disappeared. The description was vague: a tall figure, dark jacket, quiet demeanor, but it fit the growing picture. Daniel Reyes sensed the walls closing in. Police presence had become tangible. Patrols moved deliberately, cameras seemed to flicker more often, and subtle whispers reached him from the night shift. Strangers watching, noticing, connecting dots. He didn't panic. He only adjusted. He drove slower, waited longer before leaving, checked every rearview mirror. The thrill had changed. It was no longer the hunt, it was the cat and mouse game. And he liked it. Then came a break. A janitor at a warehouse noticed a box abandoned in an alley near one of the industrial zones. Nothing seemed stolen or broken, but inside, a few personal items belonging to the previous victims were found, small, mundane objects, unremarkable on their own, but unmistakable when cross-referenced. Ellison stared at the items on the evidence board. They were banal, almost harmless. A wallet card, a torn piece of fabric, a keychain. But they carried weight. Each object confirmed a presence, a connection, a crime. The detectives now had a name: Daniel Reyes, a young man known in the industrial districts for working nights, familiar with the city's backstreets, precise, patient. Plans were made. Teams deployed in shifts, unmarked vehicles ready, surveillance cameras monitored, and patrols quietly positioned. The hunt had become imminent. Daniel watched the city from the roof of his apartment. Rain fell, streaking the streets with reflective lights. He could see the patrol cars, the figures moving quietly below. He smiled faintly. They were close, but not close enough. The thrill was in observation, in anticipating their moves before they anticipated his. He understood the game now, and it was still in his control. But he could feel it, the tension, the narrowing space, the inevitability creeping closer. That night, he chose a route he had never taken before, weaving through alleys and empty streets, the rain masking sounds of tires and footsteps. Each turn, each shadow, each reflection was calculated. He didn't know it yet, but a misstep, something small, unnoticed, almost invisible, would soon leave the detectives with enough to close the net. Ellison, reviewing the pattern maps, felt the anticipation sharpen. The city held its breath. One final move would bring the investigation to a climax, and the balance between hunter and hunted would finally tip. Detective Ellison had spent weeks tracing the faint threads through the city, surveillance footage, witness accounts, and the subtle traces left behind. Each clue had led closer to one name: Daniel Reyes. On a cold, misty evening, officers set up a controlled perimeter near an industrial alleyway. Unmarked cars waited silently, patrols positioned on rooftops and side streets. Ellison double-checked every detail: communication lines, backup units, and escape routes. Everything had to be precise. Daniel Reyes moved carefully, noting the changes in the city. Rain-slicked streets reflected the glow of distant lights. He recognized patterns of surveillance: patrols moving, cameras glinting, shadows shifting. He smiled faintly. They were close, but not close enough. He paused for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the city. The thrill of observation was gone, replaced by tension. Somewhere nearby, the hunters were ready. And he had to make his move. Inside the alley, officers waited, hearts pounding but disciplined. Ellison observed quietly from the edge, counting movements, tracking reflections, watching shadows. Suddenly, a figure appeared, tall, dark jacket, purposeful stride. Ellison signaled. The net tightened. Teams closed in from multiple angles, cutting off escape routes. Reyes noticed too late. The cat-and-mouse game had ended. A brief struggle ensued, restrained, chaotic, but contained. Officers managed to subdue Reyes without further harm to anyone. The man was arrested, handcuffed, and read his rights. At the precinct, Reyes remained calm, observant, calculating. The psychological tension between him and Ellison was palpable. He didn't speak much, but the quiet confidence in his eyes was unsettling. Evidence from the van, soil and fiber samples, witness statements, and the items found in the alley were carefully documented. Each small object became proof of his connection to the victims. During the trial, prosecutors presented the pattern: the repeated late-night disappearances, the sightings of the van, the recovered items, and the forensic matches. The defense tried to argue coincidence, but the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses recounted seeing Reyes near the scenes, surveillance footage reinforced the timeline, and the forensic lab confirmed connections. The jury deliberated for days. The psychological weight of the crimes, the invisible thread of his presence, spoke louder than words. Finally, the verdict came: guilty on all counts. Sentencing was severe: 15 years imprisonment followed by the death penalty. The courtroom was silent as the judgment was read, The city outside continuing, oblivious but changed. Allison felt relief, but also a lingering unease. The city had held its breath through weeks of fear and anticipation. Justice had been served, but the shadow of what had happened would remain. Daniel Reyes, escorted to prison, remained composed. Observation, calculation, patience. These traits had guided him, but they no longer granted freedom. Behind bars, he would have time to reflect, but the thrill of control had ended. And for the detectives, the hunt was over. The threads had been followed, the net had closed, and the city, with all its quiet streets and hidden corners, had revealed the path of a predator.